Welcome to the cloudonaut podcast. My name is Andreas, and you're listening to Volume 2 of the AWS-to-go series. Get started with AWS or broaden your knowledge while walking, biking, running, driving, or whenever you enjoy listening to podcasts. There are 3 things I want to highlight before we get started. First, I want to welcome Steffen to the show. Steffen is a web and front-end developer. He just gets started with all things AWS, and that's why Steffen is here to ask questions on your behalf.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Andreas.
Hi, I'm very glad to have you on the second volume of this. So, second, the AWS-to-go series is based on our book, Amazon Web Services in Action, published by Manning. And we are currently in the progress of writing the 3rd edition. The first chapters are already available for reading, so get a copy today and check out the show notes for the details. And third, AWS expertise is in high demand. For example, our partner TechRacer is looking for cloud consultants and cloud migration specialists. TechRacer is 100% focused on AWS and has offices in Hanover, Duisburg, Frankfurt, Hamburg, Munich, Vienna, Lisbon, and Lucerne. Check out the show notes for details about the open positions and apply today. Let's get started. The topic for today is a simple example, WordPress in 15 minutes. And if you want to follow along, check out chapter 2 of our book, AWS in Action. So the idea of the second chapter in our book is basically that you get your hands into AWS as quickly as possible. So the first chapter was a little bit about the basics, the terms, everything. And the second chapter really wants to give you the full-blown version of AWS and really get you into the experience. And that's what we are focusing in this. Mm-hmm. And the way we do that is by using an example that is built on what is called infrastructure as code. And that's really a fascinating thing. And maybe I'd like to share my story with AWS a little bit. So when I started working with AWS and building my first infrastructures there, the very first time I did so, I was clicking through the AWS Management Console. And this was really cool stuff. So you can get started very quickly, spin up machines, create load balancers, configure everything together. And it's actually a very convenient way to get started. But after a while, let's say about a few months later, I realized, is there a way to automate all of that? Because I had to do the same things over and over again. And mostly because I was trying to set up a test system as well as a production system. So every time I made a change, I had to do that in my test environment and then later in the production environment. And one issue with that was, of course, it was a lot of clicking around work, which I'm trying to avoid whenever I can. And the second thing is I was doing a lot of mistakes while doing so. So I can remember that so often I misconfigured security groups, so firewall configurations, all that stuff. So really made a lot of mistakes, even in the production system. So I thought I need to automate all of that. And I looked around a little bit and I found, there is something called the AWS CLI. So command line interface. And basically what I was doing is I was writing a bash script to automate the things. So this was at least better than clicking through the management console. And I could spin up the whole infrastructure. But what I then realized is it's not that easy to write a bash script to get everything up and running because you have dependencies and it's hard to keep track of what you have been already applying and stuff like that. So yeah, and it took me, I think it almost took me a year until I realized that there is even another approach to that, which is infrastructure as code. And I discovered CloudFormation. And that's what we are using in the second chapter of the book, because this is really a mind-blowing tool if you use it for the first time. Because, as we show in the second chapter, basically what you do is you download a YAML file from our examples, and you use that, you click it's a few clicks in the management console, and then it creates a so-called CloudFormation stack, which basically spins up all the infrastructure you need from zero. So it really creates everything: the networking configuration, load balancers, firewall rules, the database, a storage, really auto scaling, and so really everything you need to get, in this case, a WordPress, so this CMS blogging system up and running.
So it's like a template?
Yes. Yeah, it's like a template or a blueprint. And basically it's a file. You can think of it like a configuration file. It describes the target state of your infrastructure, and you can use that and just basically apply it, and it spins up all the resources for you. And this is really magical. I can tell you, when you do, I promise you, if you have never done so, when you do so for the first time, it really is mind-blowing, because all those resources pop up. It's I would say it's 50 or something resources that this spins up out of nowhere, and then all that works together seamlessly. And this is really, really cool. And yeah, that's why we're using it for the second chapter, because we really want to give the reader a wow effect when going through a chapter. And I think that really happens when you spin up the whole thing from zero, and it just magically works, basically. Of course, later in the book, we dive into all the details and everything, but the idea here is just to get you as excited as I was when I was an AWS beginner and used CloudFormation for the first time. So that's really the thing.
Yeah, it can be that simple, but if you want to understand it, you should dive deeper into it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And maybe we can dive a little bit into the services or the concepts that we use to spin up WordPress, which is basically a very typical web application, right? So it's a PHP application. It's a CMS system with a backend and a front end, and it's really I would say it's really a very typical web application. And so, what do you need to get it running? So, Stefan, when you think about if you have to deploy WordPress somewhere and you have to make sure that you can reach it from the internet, what do you think? What is needed to get that up and running? What would you say?
For WordPress, I would need obviously a server who would be able to understand and render PHP server side. Then I would need a database for all the blog posts and images and all that stuff which WordPress stores somewhere. I would need a domain. I would need
So I think we covered the most important parts. Yes. So you need a web server, you need a database. Maybe what we could add to the list as well is, so WordPress stores things on disk. So things like the images that you upload, stuff like that is not stored in the database, but it's just stored on the local disk of the server. Yeah. So that's it, exactly. And so that are the core things that we need, and that's what we have in the CloudFormation template that spins up everything as well. So we have virtual machines, EC2 instances that spin up and basically install Apache and then download WordPress and unzip that and everything and configure it. We have a database. In this case, we're using RDS, which is a managed database service by AWS, provided by AWS, which gives us a MySQL database instance. And for the files, so uploads from the authors, for example, images and stuff like that, we use an EFS file system, which is basically, I don't know if you're aware of the concept. Back in the days, we all had those network file systems, NFS.
Yeah.
So this is basically a way to connect multiple machines to one file system over the network. And that's basically the same principle here. And again, this is a service provided by AWS that we can use out of the box. And maybe taking that one step further is, as we discussed in the last volume, so for chapter 1, AWS comes with that concept of regions. So they have their data centers distributed around the world, and they are called regions. And if you remember, each region consists of multiple data centers, which are grouped into availability zones. And we want to make use of that concept as well. So we are aiming for deploying every part of our architecture into at least 2 availability zones. So the RDS database by default is able to run in a so-called multi-AZ mode, which means Amazon spins up 2 machines that get replicated automatically. EFS is automatically available in all availability zones and synchronizes the data out of the box. And for EC2, so for the virtual machines, we are also not only spinning up 1 machine, but at least 2 machines in 2 different availability zones. They run in parallel, and they both run Apache and have WordPress installed. And so we make sure that when one instance fails or the whole availability zone fails, the other one can take over or just continue working basically and handle the incoming requests. And because we have 2 instances, we somehow need to split the incoming traffic to those 2 instances. And therefore we're using a load balancer, a so-called application load balancer, which is again a managed service that AWS provides out of the box, and you can use it. And this gets an DNS name, so domain name, and then you can just route your requests there, and then the load balancer distributes them to the available EC2 instances. And so that's basically the parts that we are using here for the WordPress example.
There's elastic file system. So how can I imagine that? Is this really just like, as you described it, a disk where it can host stuff, or can it do, or could I use it potentially also, let's say, as a CDN?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. So the EFS, so it's the full name is Elastic File System. And so the thing is, you need to mount the network file system somewhere. So what you typically need is an EC2 instance running that mounts the NFS file system. So NFS is basically a protocol, and Linux instances are able to mount a file system over the network by using that protocol. So basically, you mount the thing, and then it appears as a file system on your local machine, but it's connected over the network. And so the thing here is, EFS is not accessible from the outside. There is no API or no front end for that. So that's different to the S3 service, which is another storage service that AWS provides, which has a public interface, a public API, and you can use it to host, for example, images directly. And that's not true for EFS. EFS is only available over the private network. And so you need to mount it to an EC2 instance. In theory, you can mount it over a VPN connection in your local data center as well as stuff like that, but that's not what we are looking into here. So the EFS alone is not accessible from the outside. You need an EC2 instance that mounts that, and then the web server basically accesses the files.
Okay.
And hands them over, or distributes them. So an EC2 instance is needed to access those files. And maybe to differentiate that to the third storage option that is available, just to get very briefly into that, which is EBS, the Elastic Block Storage. So this is a storage where which is basically similar to a storage, how's it called? A SAN. So this is basically a storage area network. And you can mount this to an EC2 instance as well, but only to one instance. And with EFS, you can mount multiple instances. You can mount the same EFS file system to multiple instances, and they can read and write data simultaneously. So that's, I would say, the main differentiator to the other options.
Makes sense.
Okay, so I think we have gone through the architecture that we use for bringing up the WordPress system, and I hope I already built some excitement around the CloudFormation thing that spins all of that, spins all the resources that are needed for that. The next question that I'd like to talk about is how much does it cost? So this is an important question when it comes to AWS. So I think it is worth discussing that for this example. So first of all, so how do you know what an AWS infrastructure will cost you? So let's say you have WordPress running on premises now, and you want to migrate that to AWS, and you want to make an estimation of the cost. So how do you do that? So one helpful tool to do so is the so-called AWS pricing calculator. And this is calculator.aws. You can open that in the browser, and it's basically a complicated form that allows you to input all the AWS services that you're going to use. So the load balancer, the EC2 instances, EFS, RDS, the database. Did I miss something? I think that's the most important things that are where also the costs are coming from. And you can enter all of that into the cost calculator, and it gives you an estimate of the costs. And so I did this for the example that we are running, which is consisting of the virtual machines, 2 virtual machines. T2 micro is the size of those. I calculated with 8 GB storage for both of the machines. Then we have the load balancer, and we calculated with 100 GB traffic, or 200 GB of traffic. The database is running with 5 GB storage, and we also calculated 5 GB of storage for EFS. And when you type all those details into the cost calculator, do you have a guess what this will cost on AWS? Do you have any idea? What do you think is a reasonable price?
I'm sorry, I already opened the link. I know it. Okay. So it's around about $75 per month that you will pay for that. Depends a little bit in which region you deploy it. Also, of course, if you have more traffic or more storage and stuff, it will cost you more. But that's just a rough estimate of the infrastructure costs that you have. Yeah, but
for all of that.
It seems a little bit like, for me, like it's always a question, then should I do it in AWS, or because like $74 is quite expensive if you compare it to, I don't know. There are a lot of services where you can be like, hey, we give you a server, a domain, and WordPress already installed. There you go.
Yeah.
And you paid $5 or whatever a month.
Yeah. Yes, I know. So if you compare it to web hosting providers that are maybe doing WordPress stuff as well, yes, of course. I think the reason for WordPress specifically why you want to host it that way on AWS. So I think one is the whole infrastructure is highly available. So basically you have at least 2 components of every part of the architecture running in 2 different data centers. That's typically not what you get from those cheap web hosters.
That's true.
This just runs on one machine, and if that fails, it's just down. So that might be fine for your personal blog where no one cares whether it's online or not. But if you're hosting an important website, that might be different. So that might be a reason. for paying extra. And the other thing is, of course, at least that what is my experience with those very cheap web hosting offers is they usually don't expect you to have high traffic on the site. So as soon as you have
10 people
higher traffic or
simultaneously
traffic
browsing.
spikes, they will just cancel your subscription and tell you to go somewhere else. So I think that's the other reason. Or maybe in some organizations they just want to have full control over the infrastructure. So basically, as you have control over the web server, over the virtual machine, over basically everything, all the parts of the whole system, the network as well, you also have, of course, ways to, mitigate security risks, stuff like that a web hoster wouldn't do for you. But yes, I agree. There are many scenarios where it's probably much more advisable to host WordPress somewhere else than on AWS. That's maybe true as well.
Yeah, but I guess the availability is a really good point because we also had the problem that we got like a email from the provider which says like, hey, we are updating our servers and the server will be down for like beginning maybe in this week, we will see. And we don't know for how long.
Okay, that sounds very professional. Okay, yeah, but that's actually what you can expect for that price. They of course don't have the capacity to do that in any other way. Yeah, so that's probably a good reason. And of course, that maybe is something that we need to discuss when we talk about pricing. So of course, there's also a low-cost version available. So you could, in theory, you could just spin up one virtual machine hosting the web server and the database, of course. And without a load balancer, without EFS and so on, that would be much, much cheaper as well. So this is probably $10 or something. So this is, of course, the cost is mostly coming from that sophisticated architecture that really makes use of those availability zones and so on. On the other hand, the operations effort that you have with the setup that we discussed is really reduced a lot because, so for example, the database is something that AWS is fully responsible for. So things like backups, patches, all that stuff is happening automatically without a huge downtime. So you benefit from that, which otherwise you need to do that somewhere, somehow on the machine manually or with a cron job that probably fails from time to time. And then the disk runs full and stuff like that. So you have a lot of, typically you save a lot of operational effort, a lot of time when it comes to for maintenance and stuff like that. Also EFS is totally maintenance free. The storage grows as you need it. There's nothing that you need, no other disk or something. It just works out of the box. So I think those things are also differentiators.
Could I also opt out of, like, let's say, or like how does this RDS works with MySQL, where let's say I have a WordPress system running and this is currently using, I don't know, the MySQL version 9. I don't know. And let's say the new version of MySQL would have a breaking change for the current WordPress system. Would it, or could I opt out of not updating to that new version? Or
yeah, so only the maintenance releases get applied automatically. So if you switch to the new major version, that's a manual thing.
Okay.
You basically need to tell AWS to do so. It's only the other maintenance security patches that AWS applies automatically.
And this RDS system, can I imagine this one being like a shelf full of database providers like MySQL, MongoDB, or I don't know, whatever. Are there, like, is it basically a list I can pick from, or could I also be spin up my own database with whatever.
So RDS is the relational database service. So it's only relational database engines.
Okay.
So it supports MySQL, it supports MariaDB, it supports Postgres, and then Oracle, Microsoft SQL. Those are the supported database engines. And basically you select the database engine that you want to use. And then you can think of it in the background. AWS provisions virtual machines for you and basically configures them, provisions them with a database of your choice. So at the end, there is a virtual machine running somewhere, but the benefit is you only get a database endpoint and you do not have any access to the system, to the machine itself. You have no root access to the machine. The management of the machine is the job of AWS. So all you get is the endpoint, and you can basically configure the machine a little bit, and then AWS applies the changes. And the beauty of that is, you get a pre-configured, fully managed database engine from AWS. And I think, for example, only the thing backup and high availability, for example, with falling back to another instance in another availability zone out of the box. So to get that functionality, to build that functionality yourself, you already need some deeper knowledge of a database system. It's not that easy to do that yourself. And I think that's the real benefit of using that. So basically, you don't need to know too much about the database that you're using. You can just use it, just use the endpoint of it.
Makes sense, yeah.
Okay. So we have discussed the architecture, we discussed the pricing, and then I think I want to come back to my excitement about CloudFormation, so the infrastructure as code tool that spins up all those resources out of the box, because at the very end of the chapter, so at the end of chapter 2, you will delete the infrastructure as well, because of course we don't want you to have to pay for your AWS resources. In our book, we always aim to use the free tier, which is an offering from AWS to basically allow you to try things out for free. And but that applies that you also only use the resources for some of them only for a certain amount of time, or only for a certain amount of only certain capacity of those services. So that's why it's important to basically clean up the examples afterwards. And that's why the last section of the chapter is deleting your infrastructure. And the beauty here is, as we're using CloudFormation, this is really, really simple. Because what you have to do is you go to the management console, so to the web interface, you open the CloudFormation service, you select your stack, and then you just click delete. And that means in the background now, CloudFormation deletes all the resources that it has been creating formally, and it just deletes all those resources. So it makes sure to delete everything that you have created. It doesn't forget any resource. It doesn't forget the EFS. It doesn't forget a security or something. It just deletes everything. And to implement that yourself, or to do that while clicking through the management console, is not that easy actually, because those resources depend on each other, and you cannot just delete in any order. You have to follow a specific order. Because, for example, I can tell you, you cannot delete a security group, a firewall configuration, while it's still in use, for example, by an EC2 instance. So it's important to get the order right. And CloudFormation does that out of the box automatically for you. So you just click the button, you wait a few minutes, and then the whole infrastructure is gone, and you're not paying anything anymore for those resources.
That's actually a very good service, especially if you spin it up with this blueprint. And And then you probably maybe are not aware of what has been created in the first place.
Yes. Yes, exactly. So if I have to, or if that feature wouldn't exist, I would have create a really long instruction list of what you have to delete in which order. And but with CloudFormation, it's just the click of a button and it just deletes everything. And that's really cool, I would say.
That's really cool, yeah. I run into this deleting thing problem once, where I tried to, I can't remember what it was, but I ran into this problem. Like I wanted to delete something, and it said popped up this error message where it told me like, oh, you need to delete this first because it's dependent on each other. Mm-hmm. I'm like, all right, to this service. And I tried to delete this one. It was like, oh no, you have to, you can't delete this.
Yeah. It's really a dependency graph of all those things. It's not that easy to get that right manually. So yeah. Okay. Stefan, I think we have gone through chapter 2, and I hope you and also our listeners really got excited about AWS from what we have been talking through, especially about the infrastructure as code aspect. And I can promise you the infrastructure as code or CloudFormation in specific is something we will come to in the other chapters that we will discuss as well. So this is really a basic or an important concept that we have through the whole book is infrastructure as code.
Very nice. Yeah, I learned a lot today again, especially that those YAML templates can be very helpful.
Yeah. Cool, Stefan. Okay, so let's close this. So did you learn something new by listening to this podcast episode? May I ask you for a favor? Please tell your friends and coworkers about the Cloudonaut podcast. Also, leave a review on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to podcasts. Our work on Cloudonaut is possible only because of your support. Therefore, we want to thank our supporters. With your help, we can continue to produce independent and high-quality content focused on AWS. If you are not already doing so, please consider supporting us with a one-time or recurring donation as well. You will find all the details in the show notes. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon.